right, now on to a discussion with somebody who has done more than most, I would say, to really change the narrative about the most valuable blockchain. We're talking about Casey Rodarmor, the creator of Ordinals and Runes, which has really got people to think about Bitcoin differently as something more than money. Please welcome Brad Cowan, founding editor of the protocol at CoinDesk, and Casey Rodarmor. Good luck, guys. Me too. Yep.
Well, we have had so many incredible panels and presentations and discussions at Consensus already, and I'm guessing that for a lot of folks, this conversation we're about to have here with Casey Rodarmor might be the highlight of the entire event. It is for me. Casey, welcome to the Consensus 2024 main stage.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good to be here, you know, in the heart of the crypto degenerate casino.
Okay, good. All right, just a little housekeeping. We have 20 minutes here. We're going to try to get through as much as we can, but right after we're finished, there is going to actually be an AMA with Casey over at the town hall stage. So if you want to ask Casey Rodarmor a question, go right over there after we're done here.
All the hard questions, grill me, you know.
From actual people, actual devs probably. All right, okay, let's just get right into it. Casey, okay, it's a pretty well-known story. You basically single-handedly, as an independent developer, without any kind of funding or anything, you developed first the Ordinals protocol last year for NFTs, and just last month, timed to the Bitcoin halving, which was brilliant marketing stroke, by the way.
Thank you, you know, got to make up for the lost fees.
Okay. That was runes for fungible tokens, and what's fascinating is you've more or less chronicled this entire journey on the Hell Money podcast with Aaron Redwing, your co-host, which, by the way, I would say is so good. It's really good. I recommend it to anybody as like even just like a basic education in Bitcoin. I think it's really good.
Yeah, we did a lot of old episodes that are like educational content. I think the craft store Bitcoin episodes where we explain how the Bitcoin network works with crafting supplies from Michael's is a highlight, I would say.
I personally liked Aaron's episode on Bitcoin astrology, which is like definitely one of the most fascinating podcast episodes.
It's the two genders of the podcast.
Okay. All right. Now, Casey, a lot of people know about these protocols that you've come out with, but maybe a lot of people don't necessarily know about you personally and kind of how you got to that point, you know, where you're working on Ordinals, starting the Hell Money podcast. And you and I talked a couple weeks ago. You have a really interesting kind of non-traditional career path, dropping out of high school in the East Bay, and just 2 or 3 minutes on how you got from that point to starting Ordinals.
Sure, yeah. I dropped out of high school when I was 15 because I was depressed and I was like, I don't know what the point of high school is. There isn't really anything that I want to do. All the classes are so stupid. They made me write stupid essays. I didn't like it. So I dropped out and I did things like work at a movie theater and as a game tester and doing room service. Eventually I discovered programming when I was like 21. I was like, this is great, I love it, this is what I'm gonna do. I managed to, through community college and cleverly manipulating my transcript, get into Berkeley where I studied computer science. And then I did for a bit have a pretty traditional career. I worked at Google as a site reliability engineer. And then I did work as a Bitcoin core dev at Chaincode Labs, but like a very minor Bitcoin core dev. I would do these tiny PRs, like cleaning things up or like writing a test. And I got into Bitcoin in 2013, but for a long time I didn't really do much Bitcoin development, mainly because I didn't have any ideas for like what I could do that would make a big impact on Bitcoin. Then in 2019, I saw art blocks, the NFTs on Ethereum, that were a kind of generative digital art that I had made a lot of in the past. And I thought, wow, there's like a market for this thing that I've done as a hobby. And then I was like, okay, maybe I want to make NFTs. I looked at doing NFTs on Ethereum for a whole host of reasons that I won't go into. It's just awful. Like you have to write a smart contract when you just want to put a JPEG on the blockchain. The data's not actually on the blockchain, it's on some server somewhere that can go away. So I was like, I can't do this on Ethereum. And then I was like, all right, I guess I have to do this on Bitcoin, which is why I did Ordinals and inscriptions.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for that. I'm curious, how would you rate yourself as a Bitcoin coder? You know, and do you have any simple ideas or secrets of your personal work habits? How did you manage this?
So as a Bitcoin developer, I'd actually rate myself pretty low. Knowing a bunch of other Bitcoin developers that are just so smart and so deep into the weeds of the protocol, I would say I'm pretty mediocre on that front. I think maybe I'm pretty creative and I think of a lot of weird ideas. One thing that I do is I've just tried a whole lot of things. I think from a lot of people's point of view, I came on the scene and had like a massive success and then did another protocol which was like also relatively popular. But I've tried so many things that haven't gone anywhere, and I'm not afraid to just shit can them. Like if they're not working, I don't do them. And I have a lot of ideas, but then if those ideas are essentially too complicated, I'm like, that seems like very hard. I'm not afraid to give up on them and try something simpler. Ordinals and runes are both incredibly simple, and that's why I was able to do it, you know, myself with some help from other people. If I had picked larger or more complicated ideas, they simply never would have seen the light of day. So I really encourage people to keep things simple, keep things practical, don't be afraid to try things and throw them away. Don't get too attached to making something work that is just not going to work.
That's really incredible. Thank you so much. All right, just to zoom out, there are so many visions of what Bitcoin is, what Bitcoin should be, what Bitcoin will be. I've heard you talk about hyper-Bitcoinization on how many podcasts, but just 2 minutes, what is your view of what Bitcoin will be for? What is, or even 5, 10 years, or maybe the end state of Bitcoin?
Sure. So I mean, even though I've made protocols for doing other things on Bitcoin, for making NFTs on Bitcoin and doing fungible tokens on Bitcoin, I think that Bitcoin's core use case is as uncensorable hard money that can take on really the big bad enemy, which is the government. I think everything about blockchain, the only thing that's interesting about any sort of blockchain is the extent to which it can resist the government, right? Because the government is actually, when we talk about centralization, the government is the most centralized thing on earth, and it's not just centralized, it's also violent. So I view Bitcoin's primary role as being hard money that individuals can adopt to transact and do all the things that they want to do with money. And I view ordinals and inscriptions and runes as really being a sideshow. They are not as important as Bitcoin's main use case. They provide this sort of niche, fun, degenerate thing to do on Bitcoin that do contribute to fees on Bitcoin and get some users to Bitcoin and get people using Bitcoin in weird, advanced ways. But they are not anywhere near as important as Bitcoin's primary use case. If Bitcoin can just replace the money, it will be the biggest impact of any technology that has ever existed. I mean, technology all builds on itself, so you couldn't have the internet without Bitcoin, so I guess the internet has a bigger impact. But that core use case of money is enough, right? If Bitcoin allows us to throw off the shackles of our oppressors who tax us and tell us what to do and put us in cages if we don't do it, it will 100% have succeeded, even if it has no other utility.
Yeah. You've talked a lot on the Help Money podcast about your motivation for starting Ordinals and runes, and a lot of it is, okay, if people are going to trade meme coins and altcoins, they might as well do it on Bitcoin, is kind of the philosophy. But I mean, it raises the question of, is this good for Bitcoin? Curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. So I for sure would not have done anything that I've done if I thought that it were bad for Bitcoin, even if it meant that I could personally be, successful and write code that everybody wants to use. So, Bitcoin has this hard cap of 21 million coins, and every 4 years that cap gets cut in half. And we're currently in the 3.25 Bitcoin reward era, where every new Bitcoin block creates 3.25 new Bitcoin. And so what this declining inflation schedule means is that the security of Bitcoin must eventually be paid for by fees. That is the destination in which, that is the direction in which we are headed. So my personal view is that all sources, most all sources of additional demand for block space and additional people who are willing to pay fees is good for Bitcoin. And I would prefer those sources appear sooner rather than later, right? I would prefer that as the subsidy declines, subsidy is the new Bitcoin that's created in every block, we get this additional demand for block space. And we don't sort of wait and just hope that one day hyper-Bitcoinization is going to happen and everything's going to be great and we're going to have all the fees. So yeah, I do think it's good for Bitcoin. And another way it's good for Bitcoin is that users of Ordinals, inscriptions, and runes on sort of a per capita basis are, I think, the most active and weirdest users of the Bitcoin network. They're not just doing simple transfers, they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. They're building all sorts of weird wallets, they're doing on-chain swaps, all sorts of strange configurations of transactions that were not so much done before. And I think that makes people develop new techniques, figure out how to use Bitcoin, develop technologies and services and infrastructures and library and code that ultimately support normal users wanting to transact. So I think it's all good. It's sort of all grist for the mill. Bitcoin is it's not a fragile system. And so I think all these new use cases contribute to both the security, robustness, and our technological development around Bitcoin.
Well, okay, just some data here that I looked up the other day. Okay, Runes launched just last month. According to Dune Analytics, there's been 75,000 etchings.
An etching is a new rune being created.
Yeah, okay.
One fun thing about being a programmer is you can make up preposterous words and then force people to use them. Like, no, you have to say ordinals and runes and etchings now.
Well, okay, so this has generated 2,322 BTC of fees for Bitcoin miners, $162.5 million. I mean, in a world where, a lot of projects are looking for revenue, that is a lot of money people are paying for etching, for runes transactions. But okay, obviously a windfall for the Bitcoin miners, as you were just explaining, that sort of ties in and might compensate them for the drop in the rewards. But the question is it sort of break the L1 for certain users? Is that going to accelerate the development maybe of L2s on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think one nice thing about the fees that have been generated from runes is that they are bursty. We've had periods of very high fees, and then we've gone back to more moderate fee rates of like 10 sats for vbyte. So I think this gives people a preview of the destiny of Bitcoin, right? They can see what it's like when fees are very high, and maybe it's a wake-up call. For example, if you have a bunch of small UTXOs that would be very expensive to spend in a high fee rate environment, this gives you a preview and tells you like, okay, you do need to be preparing for this. You do need to watch your UTXOs and keep them small. And yeah, it definitely does price out lower valued use cases of Bitcoin. But this is the sort of destination of the chain. This is not just where we are going, but where we want to go if the chain is to be secure. So I think getting a preview of that is very useful. And yeah, partially because people now see that you can make protocols on top of Bitcoin, people have been putting a lot more energy and a lot more investment into Bitcoin L2s. There's probably dozens of L2s with varying levels of preposterousness that people are trying to build.
And you have a favorite one?
No, I don't. I mean, my attitude towards complicated systems is that I'll really believe it when I see it. 99.99% of the projects at this conference are complete and utter bullshit. They have some fancy white paper, they make all these crazy claims, right? And their purpose, if we ignore, what they are trying to do, yeah. Glad that that's sort of known. But their purpose is really to print a token and dump it on retail investors. And it's very hard to predict how a very complicated system is going to is going to behave when it's in its like ideation stage, when it's in their white paper shilling phase. And that's where all of the L2s are. And so you should really only believe these projects, including Bitcoin L2s, once they function. Once you can go use it and you can be like, this thing solved a problem for me at a reasonable cost in a reasonable amount of time. And so once an L2 is able to demonstrate that, then I'll certainly become a true believer. But until then, it is guilty until proven innocent.
Just to kind of pivot a little bit, but related, let's talk about Bitcoin governance, which you did a really interesting podcast a couple episodes ago with Tyler, the CTO, I think, of Taproot Wizards. Is that right?
I don't know. He's a great guy. He's involved with Taproot Wizards. I don't know.
But he has also done his personal research on Bitcoin governance. He made a game that's modeled after Candyland that is basically just how Byzantine the Bitcoin governance process is. And we've written a lot about just how hard it is even to get a Bitcoin improvement proposal number. And there's been some changes in the way it works. They just added some editors recently to kind of reduce the bottleneck. But you sort of built on Bitcoin as is. You didn't need a code change to add a new primitive or to enable this, and I'm curious, based on sort of how dysfunctional Bitcoin governance is that the only way plausibly to move forward?
Well, so I would actually say I don't consider Bitcoin governance to be dysfunctional. It makes people a little bit uncomfortable. Like, Bitcoin governance is an anarchic mob of a bunch of people on the internet who want to do things, right? And a bunch of developers that all have their own different ideas about what to do and how it should be done. And then they get on the internet and GitHub and Twitter and they fight. They beat each other up and they yell at each other on the internet until some sort of rough consensus emerges and people are some weird diffuse group of people, we've reached consensus, like whatever that is, and people have sort of an idea about what they want to do. And I would actually argue that this is the absolute best form of governance that Bitcoin could have. The thing that makes people uncomfortable about Bitcoin governance is that there is no formal governance. They can't go look, these are the 3 people that are the decision makers, or here's the vote that happens once every year where we decide what's going to happen to Bitcoin, or look at this GitHub repo where these devs are deciding amongst themselves what's going to happen. We don't want that for Bitcoin. Those formal mechanisms are ultimately the way that terrible decisions get ramroded through the process, right? We actually do want it to be an anarchic, messy process, and fundamentally, we want it to be possible if you don't agree with what people want to do, that you don't need to adopt it. You just keep running your code the way you want it to do, and it's incumbent on the people who want to make changes to convince everybody that it's a good idea. And of course, this has downsides because it's slow, it's messy, it's weird. You can't point to some series of votes or blog posts that tell you what's going to happen. But I really strongly believe that this is the best way of doing it that we know how. That being said, I personally would rather drink poison and jump off of a bridge than try to participate in the Bitcoin, Twitter, GitHub, consensus process. So I've always focused on okay, well, how can I scheme and trick Bitcoin into doing what I want it to do? And as a result, I didn't have to ask anybody permission. And that is, I think that if you want to make a consensus change to Bitcoin, that's great. And if you have the intestinal fortitude to participate in that process, that's awesome. I don't like it when people yell at me. So if you don't want to do that, you can also figure out how to just sort of tweak your idea until it works on Bitcoin as is.
And so there's a couple of high-profile proposals that people say might make things easier. There's the opcat, the check template verify, but there's also Robin Linus's BitVM, which was the breakthrough there. Same thing, which you don't need any changes in Bitcoin Core. I'm curious, what in your mind is aside from Ordinals and runes, like what are some of the most promising possibilities for Bitcoin kind of on the horizon right now?
I generally, so I don't have an incredibly nuanced opinion on these various soft fork proposals. I generally like them, mostly all. I think that one nice thing about these proposals is that the majority of these proposals are proposals for new Bitcoin script opcodes. And if you don't want to use a new opcode, you simply don't have to, right? That's one of the benefits of Bitcoin. These proposals aren't radically aiming to change the Bitcoin network, how it operates in a way that you would somehow be opted into or forced to use it. So for example, opt check template verify, which lets you put certain sorts of constraints on how a UTXO may be spent in the future, which can't be done unilaterally. Somebody can't force you to use it. I think that's generally good. It seems like it's relatively low risk. If you want to use it, you can. If you don't want to use it, you can opt out. It has a simple implementation. And a lot of these proposals sort of fall into this category. So generally, I'm pretty supportive of them and whatever sort of the Bitcoin community decides that they want to adopt. And this is very distinct from the way that Bitcoin and, for example, Ethereum operates. A lot of the time, Ethereum makes changes that if you do not adopt them, you are no longer on the Ethereum network. If you don't upgrade your software every so often with the new set of whatever weird features, you are no longer on Ethereum. It's hard fork after hard fork. It's my way or the highway. And so that's why I'm much more supportive of these changes on Bitcoin, because you as a user do not have to follow them. You can just keep using Bitcoin, keep using your existing software, and it's business as usual.
All right, I think this is going to be our last question. You're going to have to go fast.
Let's go.
But it's also kind of a hard question, so you're going to have to go really fast. I mean, you've mentioned on Hell Money Podcast that you don't really get paid anything by runes or ordinals?
No, I have not monetized it at all. I haven't printed a token. I haven't even sold any NFTs yet. I've made $0 off of the runes protocols themselves.
But that always makes everybody suspicious. Like,
yeah.
What is his motivation?
I mean, my motivation is I like having fun on the computer. I like to tinker. It's been very fun to think about and build all of these different cool things.
But do you have any way that you're going to get paid ever for all of this stuff?
So I have a podcast. It's called the Hell Money Podcast with my lovely co-host, Aaron, who's sitting over there. And the community has been very generous in supporting the Hell Money Podcast Patreon. So that's actually the only way that I've made money off of any of this is the Hell Money Podcast Patreon, which is great. I'm glad that the answer to this question is not like, oh, I pre-mined some token and dumped it on a bunch of idiots. No, there's a Patreon that you can sign up for. And the community has been very, very generous so far. So yeah, that's the finance story. But really, I like to tinker. I like to have fun. These systems are weird and interesting, so it's just a pleasure to work on them and see them get adopted by people.
Yeah, well, that was perfect timing, Casey.
There we go.
Question. All right. Thank you so much. Like I say, we are going right over to the town hall square for an AMA. Please join us over there.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Casey. Great job. As Brad just said, if you want to catch more from Casey, you can go to the town square where he'll be doing a speaker AMA. Okay, we're going to take a break now until 12:30. Go get yourself some lunch. Take in the sights. Enjoy the place. But when you come back, there will be more fascinating conversations pushing the frontiers of innovation, including talks about staking, restaking, and all that good stuff. So we'll see you back here at 12:30.